tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Well, I said we talk about the big and the small here. Let's go to one of the bigger ones because Canada's back. Do you remember that? It was Justin Trudeau's bold proclamation when he was elected that Canada's place in the world was going to be secured. Well, now we are being chided by our allies for not spending enough on defense. A letter from 23 senators was urging Canada to meet its NATO benchmark of spending 2% of GDP on defense. Canada has still at this point not made significant moves towards that. Richard Shimooka is a senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and joins me now. Richard, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So first off, explain why this target matters, because Canada is not alone in falling short, and some countries well below that target.
Well, we're certainly in the bottom area, and even our ambassador from the United States has just recently said that in a public statement. But it's important for a bunch of reasons. The actual target number may not be as relevant. It's really a benchmark that has been agreed to by all NATO states to sort of have a threshold by which states kind of reach that number. And when you hit 2%, what generally happens is that you start having enough funding that to sort of cover all the major bases of defense. So you're talking about the equipment purchases, the operations and sustainment numbers, and also your personnel. And it allows for basically a sustainable level of defense output within a country. And for Canada, we've really missed that for several decades, I should say. And especially in the last 10 years, we've at the very bottom, we hit about 1% just as the Harper era ended. And we've seen a ramp up of the funding since, but a lot of that money has not really gone towards basically capital purchases, so rehabilitating the equipment by which the military utilizes. And had we hit 2%, you start seeing the numbers sort of come to alignment where you start seeing a regular replacement schedule for equipment that would allow for the military to have a newer, more sort of less expensive operation and management costs that are associated with actually operating defense.
Yeah, it's certainly how the money is spent matters. I mean, theoretically, you could, blow your billions of dollars on, DEI consultants and, workplace training and, technically spend 2% of your GDP on the defense, but you're not talking about substantive investment there. And in Canada, I feel Canada must have one of the worst track records in NATO for defense procurement, just in terms of how long it takes and how insanely convoluted a process it is. And that can't be helping us.
Certainly, it's among the worst. And one of the big sort of factors that if you look at is that there's another threshold, it's the 20% threshold for actual capital purchases. And in the last defense policy update, they actually did say that they're going to hit the 20% threshold. The reality is that if you look at some of the more serious members of NATO, they will actually hit around 30%. So that's the United Kingdom, France, and the United States. And that's where you start seeing you actually become more operation relevant. You have newer equipment that isn't around 20 to 30 years of age. You're looking at equipment that's starting to come around 10 years, maybe 15 years. And so but our system, as you sort of point out, has been really not been able to sort of deliver systems within reasonable timeframes, right? So if you think about, we just recently announced that we're going to purchase a new drone system, the MQ-9. It's taken basically 17 years for the government to go from initial conception of the project to deciding and announcing a purchase. And it's going to take another 4 some years to actually get it into service or initial operating capability. Most countries have done that in under 4 years, the whole system. And the MQ-9, the RPAS system is, it's a bit of an outlier, but if you look at most of our other programs, they tend to take 1 to 2 to 3 years longer than what they should. And as a result, we sort of keep older systems into service for longer. And that, again, increases the operating cost of the military. And that actually makes the system much less efficient overall.
So let's talk about the America component here. The United States is a country whose military is very well integrated with Canada's on a number of things. We share intelligence, we share air defense, we are obviously allies in NATO. So what does it mean when Canada is getting really notably reprimanded by American politicians?
So this has been coming for a while. You've heard, there's been basically a lot of grumblings that the Americans have gone privately to Canada and have said, this is not acceptable. And as you note, Canada's in a really unique position where, because we're part of NORAD, we have a binational command where basically our military forces and their military forces operate shoulder to shoulder in a single unified command system. So the US has a very unique situation where they actually spend their money on our defense. 60% of NORAD spending is actually American spending. So they have a real interest to see our security as well as their security properly paid for. And that's why you're seeing 23 senators, some pretty significant names within both caucuses, like Tammy Duckworth, who's a major senator for the Democratic Party, come out and say this is just not acceptable. And you don't see this happen very often. And that's largely because the complaints that have been stated consistently through a wide variety of places is they feel it's just not been heeded, and they finally came out and said it in public.
So let's talk about where this goes from here. Obviously, governments are going to have to spend a lot of money at a time when the Canadian government doesn't have all that money to fix this. And even for a conservative government to come in, there's a risk attached to saying we're going to spend that much. So politically, where do you see this going?
My best guess is that even if you had a new government come in, they're going to look at the system itself and say, as we were just talking about the procurement system, that it needs reform, like serious reform. And the spending that we pour into this, with some exceptions, will probably not be spent quickly enough or effectively enough. So I don't foresee in the near future, even if there was a new government, that there would be vast changes to how defense is sort of the money that's allocated to defense. And if you look at how the Liberal government has sort of allocated spending, a large portion of this is backloaded past 2028, 2030 or something like that. There are some big purchases coming through. The CSE are the new frigates that will replace the Halifax class, which are now at 30 years of age, is going to start ramping up pretty soon. But there's a whole bunch of other systems, and it's really the sort of unsexy, sort of in-between stuff, that kind of the connectivity that's really actually revolutionizing warfare going on. And those systems really require a new way of actually thinking about defense and operating defense. If you look at our allies, like the United States and United Kingdom, they're starting to make major reforms around this. So my guess is that you probably wouldn't see much of a deviation from the white paper, but certainly you would see you may see some real efforts at trying to reform the system in order to make it better when we actually have to put money into it, that we get better results than what we're getting now.
All right, well, it's a fascinating topic. Let's hope some common sense prevails here. Richard Shimooka, Senior Fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.